So this week's spooky space, I'm actually really excited to tell you about because I was able to visit and tour this location. And I always get really excited about places I actually get to go and visit because I feel I can bring you that kind of firsthand experience. And I feel like there's more of a connection with the information that I'm giving you. But yeah, so we stepped off the subway and we followed a passage along a brick wall, which leads you up to a small, kind of like a little staircase. And you pass through kind of these hedges. And I mean, it looks like you've stepped back in time. It was very magical and kind of mystical. But you stroll down a row of Queen Anne homes, and there were Victorian street lamps out. And these are some of the last wooden homes left. Now, I actually specifically saved this post for today, July 16th, as it's the anniversary of Eliza Jumel's death. Now, Eliza, she's one of the famous owners of the home, and most people know her for being rather eccentric and what's a word? Rather harsh and abrasive. But I kind of saved this in honor of her. So I'll be telling you about Manhattan's oldest surviving residence. It's now a historic museum that sits upon Coogan's Bluff. Now, this is the second highest hill in the neighborhood of Washington Heights, and it actually sits on the ancestral home of the Lenape people. The contrast of the white manor, just against the green plush lawn, is eye-catching, and it's just beautiful. And it definitely keeps the city's colonial era alive. Now, it was originally built as a family home, but it ended up being used as a sort of headquarters for George Washington during the American Revolution. That is until the British military and Hessian troops took over at one point. After the war, it was briefly used as a tavern, a stagecoach shop, and an inn for travelers until it was abandoned. In 1810, Stephen and Eliza Jumel purchased the home and some of the surrounding land, and they performed a major renovation. The home has been witness to most of New York's rich history as it grew, prospered, faltered, and rose up anew from the ashes. Aaron Burr actually lived in this home as well, and some say that he may never have left, even after his death. So let's get on to this week's spooky space. That is the Morris-Jumel Mansion. Hello, fellow fiends. Welcome to another episode of Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces. If you're joining me for the first time, I am your creator and host, Cassiopeia, and if you're a returning listener, welcome back. You can find new episodes of the creepiest and spookiest content every Tuesday on your favorite podcast platform and or YouTube. If you subscribe to the Patreon page or through Spotify, which you can do for as little as $5 a month, you gain access to bonus episodes every other week, a merchandise discount good for all purchases in the Wick and Faye shop at pizzaandpigtails.com. You will also receive a Welcome to the Fiendish Family swag box with Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces merchandise. Just my little way of saying thank you for the support. If you're wanting to support without subscribing, I do have a Cash App and a Venmo. Any and all support is definitely appreciated, and it all does go right back into the upkeep of the podcast. Also, just following on socials like Facebook, Instagram, podcast platforms. YouTube also helps the podcast get seen. Liking, commenting, sharing, and even leaving reviews on those platforms helps as well. purchasing merchandise in the Wick and Fay shop. That's actually, even the creepy cases, merchandise, the candles, the books, anything in that shop also goes to supporting the podcast. If you are a small business like myself or a big business, I do have ad space in future episodes available. So if you're looking to get your content or your products featured, email me at creepykcases.spookyspaces@gmail.com to request those budget-friendly packages. Also, if you are looking to sponsor an episode in the future, definitely send me an email as well. Or if you have a creepy case or a spooky space that you would like to recommend, I would love to hear it. So send those over to me as well. Without further ado, let's get on to this week's spooky space. Now, originally built as a summer family home in 1765 by British Colonel Roger Morris and his wife Mary Phillips Morris and their children. They named the hill Mount Morris, and the Palladian-style home with the large Tuscan columns, a Georgian interior with a raised basement, 3 above-ground floors, a wooden facade, a double-height portico, and a rear octagonal annex, which is actually really super cool to see from the inside and the outside. Now, the Morris-Jumel Mansion sits on 135 acres and was at one time a working farm of fruit, trees, cattle, and various crops. Now, in the 17th century, in the town of Haarlem, sat a large plot called the Great Maze Land. There was a home built by Jan Kirsten, who passed it down to his daughter Yanti and her husband Jacob Dijkman. Now, by the late 1750s. Now, in 1763, Kirsten's sons sold their property to James Carroll for 1,000 New York pounds, and he farmed the land for about 2 years before selling it to Roger Morris in 1765. Colonel Roger Morris served as a member of the Executive Council for the province of New York. He had retired from the British Army in 1764 and was living with his wife, Mary, at Broadway and Stone Street when they saw an advertisement for land in Upper Manhattan, complete with an orchard, the Hudson and Harlem rivers nearby, and an unobstructed panoramic view of 7 counties in New York, the New York Harbor, Harlem River, the Bronx, Long Island Sound, present-day Westchester, and Staten Island. And you could also see into Connecticut and New Jersey. Now, and let me tell you what, the views, I don't know if you can really see that far anymore because it's so built up now, but let me tell you, the views from this home were stunning. Just stunning. So Morris actually just wanted more than, the city life. He was more than ecstatic to find a bucolic refuge from the congested downtown area. Now, Mary was the descendant of the Dutch colonial family whose homes were a little further down the Hudson, and they made their fortune in slave trade and were amongst the largest enslavers in New York at this time. Now, Morris described the site as a place where he, quote, might find eligible retreat for a gentleman fond of rural, I can never say that word right, rural employments and who wishes to pass the summer months with pleasure and profit, end quote. The land was then called Mount Morris and the home referred to as the Roger Morris House. Finished in 1770 after 5 years of construction, the estate was complete with stables, a carriage house, and a set of barns. Now, Roger and Mary had 2 sons and 2 daughters who were born in the home. They had 4 slaves who lived there as well. But their bliss was short-lived when the American Revolution broke out in 1775. Roger and Mary were both British loyalists. Historian William Henry Shelton wrote that Mount Morris was vulnerable to arson attacks. So, to protect the home, Roger left for England and, like, basically at the start of the war, while Mary and the children stayed at the home until around 1776, when they then fled to the Phillips estate in Yonkers. General William Heath and his officers moved into the home around September 5th, 1776, holding it for Commander-in-Chief George Washington, after British troops basically forced his army to retreat to Upper Manhattan. Now, Washington arrived at the home around September 14th or 15th. He actually chose the Morris house because of its location. He could easily see approaching troops from all directions. Some speculated that Washington actually chose the home due to his romantic attraction to Mary Phillips Morris, but this has never been confirmed. Washington would only spend about a month at the mansion. His military secretary aides, and they basically just built strategies for the Battle of Harlem Heights fought on September 16th. Around 8,000 soldiers stayed in nearby camps and huts on the grounds. Around October 21st through the 22nd, the army retreated to flee advancing enemy troops. Now, Colonel Robert McGaw would be left in charge of the house. On November 16th, during the Battle of Fort Washington, troops tried to re-enter the home but were beaten back by British troops, who captured around 3,000 soldiers who were kept in the home and barns, and they even took nearby Fort Washington. It became the headquarters of British Lieutenant General Henry Clinton until 1777, and then Hessian Commander Baron Wilhelm von Kniphausen in 1778. In 1780, the British once again used the house as a lookout, while Hessian Major General von Lossberg also lived there. So as you can see, the home had a lot of folks from a lot of different backgrounds throughout the time of the war. Now, following the confiscation by the colony of New York's Commissioners of Forfeiture in 1779, after Mary was accused of treason, and she was actually only one of 3 women accused of treason, Mount Morris passed through several hands. John Berrien and Isaac Lydiard in 1784. In 1785, the home was turned into a tavern called Calumet Hall, and it was operated by Talmadge Hall. Now, it was rather popular, but they were forced to sell in June of 1788 to cover war debts. Farmer Bog Darris rented the property from 1789 to 1790. Now, President Washington, along with several founding fathers and their wives, Thomas Jefferson, John and Abigail Adams, Alexander and Eliza Hamilton, Martha Washington, along with Henry and Lucy Knox, actually returned to the home to have a rather lavish dinner on the grounds. Now, the home, once again, then passed through several more hands. In 1791, Theodore Hopkins and Michael Joy obtained the property. From 1791 to 1792, Anthony Bleecker ran the Trinity Church as the church warden. 1792, William Kenyon took over the property, and in 1794, Mary Morris actually sued for the home to be taken back as it was included in her prenuptial agreement. In 1799, Leonard Parkinson obtained the property, and then it just kind of falls off until 1809, when Mary Morris dropped the claim and John Jacob Astor bought the property. However, in 1810, enter French wine merchant Stephen Jumel, our second namesake for the home, who paid $10,000 for the home and some of the surrounding land. Stephen, his wife Eliza Bowen Jumel, and their adopted daughter Mary Bowen moved into the home. Now, Eliza was quite the character. Although she was self educated in French and would become an astute businesswoman, she was born to a prostitute. In humble and immigrant beginnings, she found work in a theater. Now, sources say that she was also a prostitute and became Stephen's mistress at some point, but she wanted their relationship to be legitimate, and it's said that she actually conned Stephen into marriage by faking a terminal illness and saying marriage was her dying wish. And so the couple married in 1804. Well, surprise, surprise, Eliza overcame her illness. The couple was neglected by society when they lived in lower Manhattan, and with Eliza just desperate to become a part of New York's elite. The Washington Post reported the Morris-Jumel Mansion as the social center of colonial New York for half a century after the Jumels purchased it. The family spent time between the mansion, their home in Lower Manhattan, and France, and they remodeled the home to add the federal style entrance and the interior empire style. Now, Stephen basically bought the home as a gift to Eliza to increase her standing in society, but it wasn't really doing much for her in New York. Now, Mary actually refused to be in the mansion alone due to her belief that it was haunted by the spirits of soldiers. They put the home up for sale in 1814, but they never ended up selling it. Instead, Eliza ended up putting it in a trust as a designated entity trustee to safeguard assets until distribution. Now, the Jumels went to France as they had failed to gain enough social standing in New York, but Eliza grew tired of her social life there and came back in 1817, living in the mansion alone with her servants until Mary returned in 1818. Now, Eliza sold some furniture and paintings and then returned to France in 1821 while renting out the home. In 1825, Stephen deeded the home to Eliza, and some say it was due to her duplicity or her deceiving him, and some say it was to keep his creditors from seizing the home. Either way, she returned in 1826 with his power of attorney. Stephen had actually wanted to sell all of his properties in America because he had planned on staying in Europe. But in 1828, he returned, and this same year, the home was actually transferred over to Mary. Now, tragedy struck the family in 1832 when Stephen fell from a carriage, landing on a pitchfork. He was originally believed to be able to pull through and he was sent home, but later that evening he succumbed to his wounds, and some believe that this was due to Eliza removing his bandages and letting him bleed out, although this was never proven. Around the same time, Mary wed Nelson Chase, a local lawyer. Eliza, being the cunning woman, knew that she would have to remarry as well, and this time she went for someone with a high social standing. In 1833, at 53 years old, Eliza wed 77-year-old former U.S. Vice President Aaron Burr in the mansion's parlor. And yes, that very same Aaron Burr who shot and killed Alexander Hamilton in a duel in 1804. The marriage was not a happy one. It was very problematic, to say the least. Sure, Eliza was finally accepted into high society, as she had always dreamed, even going as far as giving herself the title of Vice Queen of the United States. But Burr was quite the spender and was going through Eliza's money faster than she could make it. So 1 year later, Eliza filed for divorce. Now, at this time, the only way to get divorced was if your spouse was unfaithful. So Eliza had one of the servants claim that Burr had been fooling around with another servant. Burr left the home for several months, but then returned, claiming that Eliza had been unfaithful with 8 men. But No one believed him. And in 1886, the marriage was awarded in Eliza's favor, just hours before Aaron Burr died. Oh, and it was Alexander Hamilton Jr. who Eliza hired on as her lawyer. Talk about a low blow. I mean, you did this to yourself when you decided to marry Aaron Burr. So, when Burr died, Eliza was basically shunned from high society. People began calling her the widow of the ex-vice president of the United States. She stayed in the mansion from time to time, but mostly rented it out while she lived elsewhere for the next 5 years, spending some of that time in France with Anne Northup, Solomon Northup's wife. And if you don't know, Solomon Northup was actually the man who wrote 12 Years a Slave. She actually even helped raise their children. I'll give Eliza one thing. Although she was not the nicest woman in the world and would step on anyone to get where she wanted, she was pretty progressive for her time, as she happily accepted people of color into her family. Now, in the late 1830s, the Pell Monroe families lived in the home, and in 1838, Oliva Knowlton added the new entryway. In 1848, Eliza and the Chase family moved back into the home, and the Chase family was the family that her daughter Mary had married into. But sadly, Mary passed away only 5 years later. It was reported that Eliza was suffering from dementia and was ridiculed for her outlandish behavior. She would be seen riding around with her hair unkempt and in soiled clothes, and she would talk about how she was haunted by past lovers. I guess Aaron Burr was getting revenge, maybe even Stephen Jumel as well, because they say that she murdered him, so maybe he was haunting her. In the 1850s, she would ride around horseback, claiming that she was being followed by people in soldier costumes, which I'm wondering if she's seeing people in soldier costumes following her around. I'm wondering if this were the spirits of soldiers who may have passed away or were murdered on the grounds. But in 1862, Eliza actually kicked the Chase family out of the home after an argument in which Eliza's great nephew threw an inkstand at the painting of her on the wall. Her grandson had actually taken up a relationship with a woman of ill repute, and she felt he was just wasting money to keep her in style. So she told him that he could either keep his inheritance or keep with the gold digger, and he was eventually cut from the will, so I'm guessing you can put together what decision he made. So Eliza lived alone in the mansion with only one male servant until she passed away on July 16, 1865. Now, there were very few visitors, and Eliza was reportedly seen wearing tattered dresses and entertaining imaginary visitors. And this was most likely due to her dementia. But she left most of her money and her belongings to a local church and various charities, leaving the home to Eliza Chase, and William Chase got nothing. Now, of course, the Chase family moved back into the home and stayed for around 20 years, all the while fighting over her will. The three branches of the family occupied different parts of the home and basically avoided each other. And now, like, this is the epitome of just spoiled and entitled. Like, kid, you made your choice. You decided that you didn't want that inheritance. She told you either keep the inheritance or keep the woman. You decided to keep the woman. Don't come back after she's passed and try to get what you could have had if you had just been like, all right, I get it. This lady's using me. Bye. Come on. Now, in 1881, a court ruled that Mary never officially owned the home, so it was put up for auction in 1882, which Nelson Chase ended up purchasing it, but sold it in 1887. Now, in 1889, the home became the residence of the early French photographer and filmmaker Augustin Leprince and his family. Now, LaPrance actually rented the mansion with the intention of debuting the first moving motion picture at the residence. However, in 1890, LaPrance and the film disappeared before the film could be publicly shown. His family remained at the house for a short time after while pursuing the circumstances of his disappearance, but he was actually never found. General Ferdinand Earle and his wife Lily and their children resided in the home from 1894 until 1903, referring to the estate as Earle Cliff. Now, following Ferdinand's death in 1903, Lily campaigned for the home to be preserved as a historic site, and the city of New York purchased the building and almost 2 acres for $235,000. On October 15, 1966, it was entered into the National Register of Historic Places. In 1967, it was named an individual landmark, and in 1975, the interior was entered into the Historic House Trust of New York City. Now, while I was researching, I was actually pretty happy to find a lot of goings on in the home. Although when I was there, I didn't really experience anything like that I would be like, oh, that was a spirit. Oh, that was. But there's definitely a vibe and an energy in the home. You never really feel fully alone, and you can almost feel there's kind of a morose energy, kind of a, like, I wouldn't say sad, but I would definitely say kind of, I wouldn't say negative either. What would I say? Just kind of a more like bummed out kind of, energy. Now, the first reports of hauntings in the home were by Mary Bowen herself. She claimed that she could hear disembodied voices in empty rooms, she would hear footsteps when no one was around, and she would experience pots and pans in the kitchen swaying in a sealed up fireplace. She said that she had frightening experiences and would actually lose sleep. Mary has been reported to be seen often in a white gown, wandering and crying. Now, most of the original furniture is still in the home, and they also have a book of haunts. While a lot of old and historic homes tend to draw attention when there are rumors of hauntings, the Morris-Jumel Mansion, however, attracted arson, and a large Dominican community left sacrificed chickens on the estate grounds, which was an Afro-Caribbean spiritual practice to help off ward spirits. Now, this caused the staff who runs the museum to stay a little more tight-lipped and downplay any of the paranormal happenings, as they wanted to protect and preserve the home and lands, and they didn't want people just randomly, kind of coming and showing up and being disrespectful. Of course, when you have the activity that this mansion does, this was no easy feat, and visitors would report feeling unusual sensations when going into certain rooms. Visitors and employees alike have reported voices, footsteps, moving objects, and your typical knocking, lights going on and off, and doors opening and closing on their own. Eliza was reported to be seen on the second floor balcony in full period dress. No one is allowed on that balcony, as it's most likely not structurally sound to hold weight. Well, during a paranormal investigation, a cat ball toy lit up on its own, and no one touched it. Now, Karen Compton has heard the original pianoforte playing music on its own while the mansion is completely empty, and she was the only person there. A Reddit post from 5 years ago read that while on a paranormal investigation, the group was downstairs in the basement/kitchen, and it was pretty quiet. They heard footsteps in the dining room above them, and then heard a man and woman talking. Then what sounded like chairs being pulled out and pushed in, and the tour guide shouted up asking if there was anyone upstairs, and all activity stopped, and it was dead silent the rest of the time that they were downstairs. When they went back up, of course, no one was there. Now, Although I know it doesn't really stop anyone, but the way that the rooms are set up when you go in, they kind of have these barriers where you kind of walk into the room just enough to kind of see around you, but you can't really go further unless you like hop over them. And I'm sure they probably open up so people who work for the museum can kind of get in and out and things like that. But I don't think just your run of the mill guest or visitor would be opening those gates there. In 1964, during a school field trip, the curator was running a little late, so the teachers were letting the children kind of play in the yard, which children can get a little rambunctious, a little louder. An older woman in a violet dress came out onto the second floor balcony and said, "My husband is very ill. You have to keep quiet." When the curator showed up, the teachers said that they were impressed with the costumes that the employees wore and the dedication that they gave to the museum. The curator looked confused and said that they don't wear costumes. So when they got inside and they had all kind of, described the incident, and the kids actually pointed to the large painting saying that the woman is who they saw on the balcony. And the curator explained that's Eliza Jamel and who she was. And upon checking, the doors were all padlocked and empty upon investigation. Now, although in the 1980s, museum director Audrey Braver said that she thinks the field trip story is a hoax. She denies all paranormal activity in the home, even though she had odd experiences with children visitors refusing to go down hallways saying bad things down there. And I mean, if you ever, children. Now, I also recommend you check out BuzzFeed Unsolved. It's season 7, episode 4, where Ryan and Shane visited the home. Of course, while it's pretty funny and comedic and everything, they got some pretty good footage. Carol Ward, the executive director of the museum, says that she has heard heavy footsteps upstairs. Of course, when investigated, it's empty. But they also explain that Washington used to pace the floors at all hours while strategizing. She said the activity is higher during events and renovations. Now, the episode of BuzzFeed Unsolved, they went into George Washington's room, and their monitor picked up someone saying, "Not now," and "Get out of the room." And it's probably George Washington being like, "Hey man, I am trying to get this war going and I'm trying to win. So if you could just get out and stop bothering me." Now there was also a random voice that just said, "Vinny." I'm not sure what the connection there is. I'm pretty sure that BuzzFeed explained it, but I don't want to give away everything. You should go check it out. Now, there have been reports of a drunk Hessian soldier spirit on the staircase. However, while a lot of people claim that he's drunk, I think, could this be a man who was injured and was actually fighting, during the last moments of his life? In the episode, there are footsteps heard moving on the staircase, and their monitor picks up the phrases, "Get him," "voices misunderstood," and "execute." A female's voice is heard saying "no" in Eliza's room. And during a seance that Ryan and Shane humorously, that's not the right word either, perform in Eliza's room, you can actually hear someone say, "What is this?" You can also hear "they want us to leave," and "remains to be" can also be heard. There were a lot of random things coming in during that episode, and I think that I think it's pretty cool, the stuff that they got. Now, during the seance at the home in 1965 by psychic Hans Holzer, remember him? I've talked about him quite a few times. He contacted a spirit who complained about his wife and then claimed that she had murdered him by burying him alive. Oh gosh, that's like one of my biggest fears. I never really thought about it much until like I started researching, and the amount of people who have been buried alive is actually pretty terrifying. If you are a little worried about that too, don't look up don't look at those stories. Don't look at that statistic. So the staff at the mansion claim that they have heard a lot of foul language in Eliza's room, which will probably totally be me, like my spirit when I'm gone, like wherever I decide to haunt or wherever my energy decides to hang out, like when I'm gone, it's definitely going to be me, like just cursing up a storm. In Burr's former bedroom, the boys hear a whistling coming from downstairs. Like they're in his room, but the whistling is coming from somewhere downstairs, and they're not. It's like him. It's like the two of them, and then I think like there's a producer and maybe a camera guy. So like there's not a lot of people in the home, and they're all kind of like in the same area. So they also hear someone say Eliza, and there's somebody here. Eliza's spirit has been seen roaming in a flowing purple dress, tapping on windows and banging on walls. She seems like a delight. They also say that she was a flirt in life, and it's said that there is a clock in the dining room that will wink at men that Eliza would find attractive. And I'm not sure how much I believe that one. Just because the clock is actually beautiful. Like, I kind of want the clock, but I don't want it to wink at anybody. But I'm not sure how much I believe that story. Now, a maid who committed suicide haunts the top floor. Reportedly, she was in love with a rich man. Some say it was a member of Eliza's family, but he wouldn't marry her, so she jumped from the window of the servants' quarters. There's also a large portrait of Roger Morris that hangs on the first floor just inside the front door. Witnesses claim that Morris not only moves around the portrait, but occasionally steps out of frame and lunges at visitors. Now, Chris Davalos and another gift shop staff member heard women downstairs laughing and a table scraping across the floor. The museum was closed, so of course they searched every room, but no one was to be found. Although the 6-foot-long wooden table in the basement had been pushed off kilter. And I've actually seen that table, and it would take quite a bit to push it off kilter because it's a pretty sturdy table. Also, the kitchen was in the basement where 4 documented slaves actually resided, and there was intense voices and movement often in the room. Now, Washington's valet, an enslaved man named William Billy Lee, who was a constant presence at his side for 20 years and was the only enslaved person he freed in his will, always responds during tours. So if you take a trip, be sure to say hello, and I wish I would have known that before we visited, because I think I definitely would have said hello to Billy, even if he didn't answer me back. I definitely would have said hello to Billy. Now, women actually tend to experience more paranormal activity than the men, so it seems that Eliza may prefer female companionship. A tour guide once saw a figure run up the stairs, but when checked, no one was up in the attic. Another felt a shove, thinking it was her friend trying to get their attention. They looked around and found no one near them. Now, Stephen Jumel is said to be heard moaning in agony, probably reliving his final moments, and that's kind of sad because I feel like once you pass, you should, if some of your energy is stuck here, I feel like it should at least be peaceful. There's heavy energy by Aaron Burr's desk. And during an investigation, there was actually icy temperatures and a ball of light, along with footsteps out in the hallway outside of his room. K2 meters picked up on energy circling the room, timed to an old-time waltz. So I guess people are there partying it up, too. So tapping and more footsteps were heard outside the bedroom door. A solid shadow figure has been seen as well. Someone actually sat in Burr's chair and felt that they were not welcome when she felt a cold shiver run down her spine and the aroma of tobacco lingered in the air. Now, the Morris-Jumel Mansion is open Friday through Sunday with self-guided tours running from 12 to 4 for $10 a person. On Saturday and Sunday, there are grounds and mansion tours beginning at 11 a.m. for $16 per person. If you are ever looking for something to do in the area, or even if you're not in the area and you're close by and you just want to see something, like you like museums and you want to take a look and see like the historical side, and it's really cool. I recommend stopping by. It is a gorgeous home. And take your time. It's don't just kind of walk through and be like, oh yeah, look at that. Oh yeah, look at that. Like, take your time and actually just like take in the history of everything. Also, if you've been to the Morris-Jumel Mansion, I would love to hear about your experience. Even if if you experienced something paranormal or if you didn't, I would love to hear about it. So drop it in those comments below. And I think, on that note, I will see you next crime. Thank you for listening to Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces, a Pizza and Pigtails production, created and hosted by Cassiopeia. Don't forget, you can find new episodes of the creepiest and spookiest content every Tuesday. If you subscribe to the Patreon or the Anchor pages, which you can do for as little as $5 a month, you get access to bonus episodes every other week, a merchandise discount good for all purchases at the Wick and Bay shop at pizzaandpigtails.com, and you get a thank you swag box full of creepy cases and spooky spaces merchandise. If you'd like to support without subscribing, you can do so through the Cash App and Venmo links. Be sure to follow along on Facebook, Instagram, and all the socials for future news and updates. And don't forget to like, share, and comment. Bring your fellow fiends in on those conversations. And as always, I will see you next crime.